absolute honour to finally come and present some results to you, because I've been involved with the network for quite a few years now, and I feel like this program has been just going on and on. But finally, we've managed to get our results analysis underway. This is one of our groups, and one of their main messages throughout the program was to have fun. And I think that that's a really important aspect of getting together and discussing issues and problems, is to have fun with it. So, just a quick outline. I'm just going to go through the program, and actually Kate's introduction is a fantastic introduction to our program, because in fact they're very similar. We don't have the online features. Ours was all about group meetings, but it's going to help me skip over a few things. So I'll just talk very quickly about the content and the participation levels that we had, our clinical results, self-management behavioural changes, and then evaluation of the key support functions. So this diagram, I'm hoping that you can all see it. We had peer leaders in our program, and we also had participants. We recruited everybody through the National Diabetes Services Scheme Register, NDSS, which you get put onto once you're diagnosed with diabetes. You're eligible to go onto that list. It holds people with all types of diabetes, so gestational, type 1, type 2. We were only looking at people with type 2 diabetes, and the list was is monitored or moderated by the Diabetes Australia organisations. So we never actually got access to the list, but through our partnership with Diabetes Australia, they facilitated that. We sent letters out to about 8,500 people throughout Victoria, inviting them to participate either as a participant or a leader. It was a randomised controlled trial, which is a very, I guess, considered to be the best kind of evidence that you can get about some kind of intervention. Very often they're associated with pharmaceutical trials, so they randomise people to getting the drug or not getting the drug. We did the same with peer support, so people were randomised to going into the peer support program in a group setting or not, really. And that had an impact on what we offered at the beginning of the program as well. So our participants, so basically these are the intervention components. Our leaders, we trained our leaders for 2.5 days, gave them a resource manual, and we gave them ongoing support, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. If you were part of the intervention group as a participant, you went to monthly meetings that were led by a trained peer leader. You got a workbook, you got access to a password-protected website with additional information and resources, and then you also got some additional resources. We had a relaxation CD, which I actually even still listen to myself, so a good CD to fall asleep to. Beyond Blue have a really great depression, some really fantastic depression resources. We also videotaped one of the self-management education training days that we had, and made that available on a DVD, so they could go back to it and look at it in small snippets. And we also provided a bi-monthly newsletter. So we had two types of outcomes. We had outcomes at the individual level, and those things included primarily a reduction in cardiovascular or chronic heart disease risk, and then changes, reductions in anthropometric and biomedical measurements. So anthropometric measurements are waist, weight, waist-hip ratio, and the biomedical clinical measurements were HbA1c, cholesterol, those types of blood test results. We also wanted to look at, on an individual level, improved mental health and quality of life, and we also wanted to ensure, or hoped to ensure, that we improved the connection between the participants and their GPs. So part of the issue about self-management of diabetes is that you need to work with your clinical team. So we didn't want to replace that in any way at all. We wanted to actually support that relationship and improve it, because part of that is a big issue, that people have diabetes and they just kind of don't go back to their doctor and think everything's okay, and they'll just go along until there's a bit of a crisis. So that was on the individual level. For the actual whole program, we wanted to assess some key peer support functions, which have kind of been defined after a WHO consultation in Geneva, and they relate to really the key functions of peer support that go across all programs. And so it was really great to hear from Kate, because many of the things that they're looking at are key functions of peer support. So those things are assistance and consultation in applying diabetes management, so that self-management aspect to support people in managing their chronic illness. Demonstrate ongoing social and emotional support, so again, similar to Kate. Improving the linkages to their clinical care, so I'm assuming that that's also part of how the MS program works, in that they don't try and replace that relationship, but they support it and encourage it to occur appropriately. And then the other thing is to demonstrate this ongoing support aspect, which is not that it just occurs during that one period or that one phone call or that one group meeting, but that in fact it's the kind of support that people can access as and when needed. So that's the background to the study. I just put this up because some of you might not have heard of this risk before. It was defined by a big study, the UK people with diabetes study or something, I think it's called, UK PDS, and it's about estimating chronic heart disease risk. So this was one of our major outcomes. We wanted to show that the risk of coronary heart disease was reduced if you received peer support. So I just put this up here because these are the kinds of things that we needed to collect in our information to be able to do this calculation. So it included things like age, sex. Because it was defined in the UK, they also took into account ethnicity, but not unsurprisingly, the majority of our population were Caucasian. Whether or not you had smoked in the past or ever, your HbA1c, which is a very critical factor for diabetes, your blood pressure, and your total cholesterol, HDL cholesterol ratio, and they all go into a big equation, and the statistical computers shake them all up and then spit out a number at the end. So I've just popped that up there just to give you a bit of background. So this was our study design. We recruited people from 24 locations in Victoria, And those locations were kind of selected based on the fact that they had a lot of people with diabetes in them. They were part of the rural health regions that have been defined by the Department of Human Services then, now Department of Health. And we needed to have 2 towns really in each region, local health region, so that we could purposefully but randomly allocate 1 to intervention and 1 to control, so that we could control for region and for access to health services, because we wanted to kind of have that a bit controlled. We needed a minimum of 1 peer leader, and the peer leaders volunteered as peer leaders. They self-identified and said, I want to lead a group. And the rest of the people from that region became participants. So we took baseline measures. The important thing that we did, and one of the sort of levelling out issues which occur when you have a randomised trial is that the people who don't get randomised to the intervention sort of have to get something out of it for offering their time and their measurements and all of that. So we felt that everybody can do with diabetes self-management education. So we decided that everybody, before the start of the intervention, would at least receive 1 whole day's diabetes education training, which is much more than most people would normally get. But we felt that it was important that even those people who weren't in the intervention got an opportunity to get something out of being involved in the study. Then we randomised each town within each region, 1 to intervention, 1 to control, and then the leaders who were in the intervention groups, they underwent the 2.5 days training, and then the groups were initiated and they met every month. One of the things that is not in here, but which we kind of decided very much at the last minute, was how were we going to support our peer leaders. They were lay people. Their only experience was that they too had diabetes. So a decision was made that we would have a weekly teleconference, and they could phone in to a number each Monday evening at 7 o'clock, and I would be on the phone. And the phone calls usually lasted about an hour and a half, and we'd just really have a discussion about what was going on, what was happening in the diabetes world, were there any issues they needed, how were they doing as for themselves, looking after them. So the idea with that was that I was modelling the kind of support that I was hoping they would then provide to their participants. So it was sort of a group within a group, if you like. And we found that to be very effective, and it was very well received. And we and other groups, and I think probably many of your groups, realise that supporting your supporters is a crucial and a really important aspect of providing peer support, because they too need support. So just quickly, the peer leader support training, very similar to what Kate provided, although we did a lot more about group facilitation, about communication, how to set goals, SMART goals, specific, measurable, I always forget what achievable, thank you. Yes, exactly. So SMART goals are very important, and it's very tricky, and the leaders actually found that they needed a bit of a refresher throughout the program about how to keep people on track with their SMART goals, and to set goals that were SMART. Everybody wants to lose 10 kilos, but, well, not everybody, but I do. But that's not a SMART goal. It's a good overall long-term goal, but it's not a SMART goal because it's not achievable. So bringing people back down to achievable goals is really quite difficult. So there was the weekly teleconference that I spoke about. We also did a weekly e-letter, so I emailed them every week as well. And then halfway through the program, we felt that it would be really beneficial to bring them back all together. They were all over the state, so we brought them all back together down to the Alfred, and we did some retraining. We did some role playing about issues that they had come across in their groups, people who were being overbearing, people who weren't participating, and so we role played a couple of those issues, and we did a great presentation on happiness and how important happiness is. And we also looked at some physical activities through the 10,000 Steps program. So we did, in the training, suggest themes for group meetings, not meeting by meeting, but over the general course of the program. And they covered all our program aims, linkage to care, goal setting, eating more healthily, doing physical activity, and then the diabetes self-management issues, so making sure that you take your medication, making sure that you test your blood. Some people had never even tested their blood ever before, and were afraid to do so. So some of the groups had demonstrations where the leader or somebody else who was doing it regularly would bring in their glucometer, and they'd all have a lesson about how to do their blood glucose. Foot care is really important in diabetes and very often neglected area of care. Eye care, stress and coping, and relationships, just how to get through the day when your husband's out there, active and can eat anything and doesn't even put on any weight, and the wife is at home and she has to cook these fantastic meals for the rest of her family, but she herself has a restricted diet or has struggles with her carbs, so it's really kind of difficult.
Michaela, just with those themes, would they get a guest presenter to come in and deliver that, or would that be the peer talking about, say, relationships or whatever?
It would be the group. That was the other thing that came out of the group mentor day, is that you use the group, because
like a peer discussion model.
Yeah, that's what the group is about. Everybody contributing their own experiences. The group leader might say, "Oh, let's talk about foot care next week," and somebody might go off and visit the podiatrist and get some information and bring it back to the group. We did have members, though, accessing their own clinical allied health professionals, and many of them invited those people to come and speak to the group, which happened. So we had psychologists, we had a podiatrist, lots of diabetes educators and dietitians, a couple of GPs agreed to come and talk to the groups as well. So the groups did as yours did, set up their own agendas, invite their own people who they were interested to hear from. So these were just suggestions for themes and things that we thought they should cover throughout the year. You can't really see this, it just sort of talks about the numbers of people. At the end of the day, we had about 98 people in the intervention group and about 100 people in the 105 people in the control group that had data at baseline and at 12 months that we could analyse. We started off with about 265 people. So there was a little bit of drop-off, and in both arms. So both people who were in the intervention and in the control equally dropped out of the study.
see some of this as well. But basically, a very Caucasian population. The mean age was about 60 in each group. 50-50 male, female, which was excellent. We were really happy with that. We thought that we were going to have a lot more females, but in fact a lot of males came along and they did really well and they kept coming, which was fantastic. We had quite a few male leaders as well. We had about 50-50 metro-rural population. The majority, over sort of, around 60% were Australian-born. And a very high proportion obviously spoke English. Most of them were either, married or married with no dependents anymore, or married with children.
Over sort of, around 60% were Australian-born, and a very high proportion obviously spoke English. Most of them were either, married or married with no dependents anymore, or married with children. About 40% were still working, so that was also interesting. We had a lot of evening meetings. Many of the current Diabetes Australia peer group meetings that happen through ComNet are daytime meetings. So that cuts out a whole big proportion of your susceptible population. So that's another thing that we wanted to think about, and in fact most of our groups were evening groups, and that was the choice of the group members. And we had about 10% who were still smoking. Most of them had been diagnosed at around just over 50, 54. Most of them had had their diabetes for about 7 to 8 years. The mean HbA1c is an important measure because this shows, and here is the optimal level, that less than 7, that's what you should be aiming for if you're a person with diabetes. So you can see that our population were kind of very close to being controlled. So, and I bring that up as a provision for the results that we look at later. So they were they weren't an out of control population. Many studies decide we're going to look at people with HbA1c of 8 or 9. These people are very uncontrolled people with diabetes. So their diabetes is not well controlled. Our population had fairly well controlled diabetes. A little bit heavy, a little bit overweight, definitely, but not huge. If anybody's been to America, they'll know what I mean by huge. The SBP, systolic blood pressure, only a little bit above the recommended level for people with diabetes. Obviously the normal is around 120, 115 to 120 over 80. For people with diabetes, they like to keep it around 130 over 80. So they're not too far off the mark, so once again, fairly well controlled population. Cholesterol, a little bit high in general. LDL cholesterol, which is the lousy cholesterol. I learned this by the dietitians at DA. So there's lousy cholesterol and then there's happy cholesterol. That's how you remember which is the good and which is the bad. So the lousy cholesterol should be less than 2.5, and they're around about the limit. The happy cholesterol, high density lipoprotein cholesterol, should be above 1 millimole per litre, and both of the groups had high happy cholesterol. And then this ratio, cholesterol over HDL, which is used in the UK PDS equation, should be less than 4, and both our groups had ratios less than 4. So we're talking about a population of people who were just on the cusp of being a little bit out of control. So they weren't up this end. That might have been easier to shift this way. So these are people who are kind of in the middle, and we just wanted to shift them just over the other side. So it was quite a big ask. So I just wanted to go through the support at the teleconference. We wanted people to attend the teleconferences at least once a month. These are the leaders. And most of the teleconferences that were delivered had people attend them at least once a month. Some people attended every single week, which was nice. And we ended up having a very, very nice supportive group where by the end, luckily, I was able to just more or less welcome everybody to the call and then sit back, and they kind of just ran themselves, which was perfect modelling for what we were wanting to have happen in the group. Sorry.
Excuse me, Michaela.
Yes.
We're just trying to photograph this, and you're moving slightly in that direction too.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Just centralise your
I'll just
report.
stay here.
It's like the statistics
Need a
that
mark
you're
on
trying
it.
to just get centralised.
I just need a floor mark.
That's it, yes, so all across the floor. That's
Okay.
Thank you.
So, and I mentioned that we had the Mentor Day evaluation, and just a couple of comments about the things that happened at those days, so it might be something that you might consider. The role play sessions were spot on. They directly related to issues leaders face and gave strategies on how to handle scenarios many of us have already faced in the group, like how to handle dominant group members and difficult behaviours. About goal setting, our group has really been struggling with goal setting, so it was great to discuss and see how other groups have been doing goal setting, and it was good to know that we're not the only ones who are struggling with this. So once again, this Mentor Day became sort of a mass day of peer support for the leaders, which I think was really important. This colourful graph just shows the kind of meeting attendance from the participants over time, and you'll see in some of the groups it was up on average around 80% of participants attended the meetings, whereas in one of the groups in Geelong down to about 35% of the members attended the meetings each month on average. Some of the group, Wendouree and Wangaratta, had fantastic attendance, really very good.
There were some reasons why.
Yes.
Reasons why? Some of it was about other things happening in people's lives. Some of it was, mostly it was about other things happening. If you've only got a meeting once a month and something happens, then you've only got one chance to go to that meeting. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think you can find often in the smaller communities like Wendouree being quite Ballarat and Wangaratta being a fairly small area, that you do get a much more closely connected community, and therefore people generally do know each other better, and they do tend to go along to things like that. It becomes a social connection.
There's a dynamic in a small community of participation.
Because they're seeing each other at the supermarket and saying, oh, I'll see you next week at the group meeting, or, so they get that constant reminder. Whereas you're completely right, the metro groups were very much more disconnected with each other outside of the meetings. So they didn't get together during the weeks. But for example, the Bendigo group, they had a walking group twice a week, every week, that members of the group went to. And so they were sort of seeing each other all the time, reminding, okay, we've got a group meeting. So they did really well as well. But some of it is about the leaders as well.
That's what I was curious about. Was it their leadership style or something? I don't know.
This Geelong group, in fact, which had a fairly consistent attendance, had two blokes who were just so organised, very, very dedicated, interested. They'd ring the members regularly. Whereas this Geelong group had members, unfortunately one of the leaders had a very serious heart attack halfway through the program. The other guy was very busy with his life. So perhaps a little bit less, not dedicated, but just less focused on the group meeting. Whereas these two chaps were, you know, it was something for them to do. They'd both retired, and so.
Just interested what happened to Richmond, given that they're only about 3 months.
So this was data that we were collecting from the leaders, and that too was a very difficult thing to achieve for the whole 12 months. So this only has the data that we've collected. We had a tick box one-page sheet, which we thought was very easy for people to tick and write down what they talked about in that meeting and who had come. But I think, in fact, it was quite a big ask for us. This is not part of peer support. This is part of a study. So they were interested in giving each other peer support, and so I can kind of understand that the study requirements that we were interested in, because it was a study, might not have been their priority, try as we might. But still, the Richmond group went on, and it was very successful. They met every week. And sadly, very, very sadly, just after the group finished, unfortunately the leader passed away. So, which still grabs me. He was a very, very, very lovely man. And so that group no longer meets. But some of the other groups still meet. The Wangaratta group still meets. The Bendigo group still meets. And a couple of the other groups that aren't up there still meet. So,
Michaela, one of the other dimensions that I've been teasing out is that with some diseases, it appears that if you perceive that you can get good one-to-one support locally, you're less likely to be committed to a peer support group.
okay.
Or in the inverse, as health professionals and services move into an area, perhaps more metro areas, and therefore provide that direct service, people are less inclined to commit in a sustainable way to a peer support group. Did you have any sense of that? It's one of the ways in which we might explain some country areas having higher rates and commitment to a peer support program or group program.
We found that our country areas actually really were very successful in getting allied health professionals into their groups. So they did have a more difficult time in actually accessing them on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
So healthcare utilisation in the country was more difficult. Getting a GP appointment within a week was significantly harder for rural participants compared to metro participants. So potentially it might have an issue. I think it goes back to what this lady was saying, Judith was saying about that there is, I hate to be sort of generalistic, but I think there is a real community feeling in the country, and country people are much more willing to share their lives and to participate in a community activity, whereas we in the metro just do what we have to do, then we go home and shut our door, and that's kind of it. And we rely on the people around us.
And the community self-reliance culture.
Yeah, and I think the Bendigo group in fact really has connected very well with the Community Health Centre, and the diabetes educators and dietitians there are very supportive of the group because they see it as an opportunity to do more than one-on-one. They can go to the group and they can access and reach 8 people or 10 people at one time. So it's much more economical for them to do that. It requires less taxing on their services during their working day when they can get to 8 people at one time. So just quickly, just going through some meeting topics and things and how often they were addressed by groups. So things like healthy diet, goal setting, physical activity, they were very highly accessed. Issues around adherence and clinical care, they too were also highly talked about. Issues about support outside the meeting, as I mentioned, very often it was about meeting up for a cup of coffee or going for a walk, and those kinds of activities did occur. And quite a few groups also had healthcare providers visit their groups as well. So now we're getting on to the results. So now I've really built the program up. Unfortunately, the clinical results, the participant results, have been disappointing to us. Basically, this table says that over the course of the intervention period, which was 12 months, the risk of a coronary heart disease event, a new one, changed at the same rate as the intervention groups. So there was basically no difference. Intervention had no real impact in reducing the coronary heart disease risk events in either of the study arms. So that was our main outcome. So you can imagine how disappointed we are. However, we looked at some other things, and the ones with tick, that nothing was significant. So if you're into statistics and you know that a significance level of 0.05 is what we're all aiming for, we didn't get there for anything.
I was just going to say that I think a lot of that is probably due to the fact that the participants were all really looking after their diabetes well to start with.
Thank you.
And
thank you for agreeing.
The people that really wanted to have come into the groups didn't come because of the same reasons that the ones who did come came. You know, the ones who did come came because they were interested in motivated to look after themselves, etc.
Exactly.
And so, you need to have more of that.
And how do you motivate those people to come to a meeting? So exactly right. And one of the ways you do that is to show that you're making a difference to their friends and the other people that they know with diabetes. So we made a difference, although slight, not significant. However, we think it's reason for some comfort. Had the people in the intervention group not been involved in the intervention group, their HbA1c levels would have increased more, as did the controls here. The HDL cholesterol we want to increase, more happy, less lousy. So the intervention group did have more happy cholesterol. And the ratio of lousy to happy cholesterol was larger in the intervention group. That's also a good thing. And the cholesterol, total cholesterol to happy cholesterol, also we want to be bigger. So we take a little bit of heart away from the fact that we were seeing some potential clinical gains in our participant group, and there are quite a few different reasons that we're looking at. One of them is that our population was relatively well controlled at the start, and they are a little bit harder to move along the continuum. The other was that perhaps the intervention isn't long enough to shift that people. We did it for 12 months only. So they might be the two kinds of reasons. However, when we looked at other factors here,
Sorry, just one other question. Did you have a weight loss? Did they have a weight loss goal? Was there
community they did? Were they in fact a less mobile group of people at the start of the intervention anyway, and therefore their physical activity may have been retarded by that? So lots of different things to look at.
So we weren't going to reveal it. We were undertaking a little test this afternoon to see whether the Vickies or the fruit is going to be important at the end.
So did any of them revert from insulin dependence back to like a tablet?
That's one of the other things that we're going to look at, and we've got a little bit of good news, still not statistically significant, but a little bit of good news about medication adherence. Just let me get to your question.
I'm just wondering if there's any complications, or I may have missed something earlier, with people with other conditions that may have affected some of it.
We've collected some of that information too, and that will have to go into the big analysis pot. Yep. So there's a lot of mediators and moderators of our results that we haven't yet put into the pot and looked at. So to get back to your question, the medication adherence, you'll see at baseline, this was the proportion of people. We had 22% of our group in the controls who were what we would classify as low adherers, so they weren't taking their medication as they should have been, and 40% high adherence, and about 37 medium. Took it sometimes, didn't take it. By the end of the intervention, in fact, the low adherers in the control group had gone up. So there were more people who were adhering less well to their drug regime. And, but also the high adherers had gone up. So they moved from the medium adherence to either worse or better. However, in the intervention group, and we saw this phenomenon by 6 months, so it already had started to happen at the 6-month mark, we had quite a significant change in low adherers, and that related to people moving into the high adherence category. So from that table, there appears to be a higher proportion of people who improved their medication adherence in the intervention group. Once again, not that magic 0.05 significance. But this improved adherence was seen at 6 months in both study arms. And we think that maybe part of that was the fact that they'd had diabetes education. Everybody had diabetes education, remember, before the study started. So that may have initiated some medication adherence in everybody at the start. By 6 months, everybody had improved their medication adherence. But in the following 6 months, the control group dropped off, whereas the intervention group continued to improve their medication adherence. So we think that the peer support has had an impact in sustaining this change in behaviour about their medication adherence, and as well potentially linking them in much more effectively with their clinical care group, their dietitians, their diabetes educator, their GP, their practice nurses, going to the doctor every 3 months just for a checkup instead of leaving it for 12, 15 months until they really, really needed to go. So there is a little bit of good news, we think. With respect to depression though, not so significantly different. We've got a couple of other measures that we need to look at for quality of life. But when we just look at the depression tool, the official kind of PHQ-9, which is one of the major study tools, psychological tools that they use to look at depression, doesn't seem to be a significant difference. Yes, everybody has improved a little bit, so the people with moderate depression have maybe moved down into the no or mild depression, but in both groups. So it occurs equally in both groups, so we can't attribute that to the intervention. So some of the reasons we've already talked about, so I'm going to skip through, that we didn't observe significant clinical outcomes was our participants were very well controlled in the first instance, and the length of intervention might not have been long enough. So let's look at our key peer support functions, and our first one is assistance to apply diabetes management plan in daily life. So the way that we addressed that and the things that we did in the intervention had the group discussion, and I showed you the results from the themes that were discussed in the groups. We had some password protected websites with some additional self-management education sessions. And then we had very much a focus on groups doing things together. So the group out in Dandenong, one of the members was a Tai Chi instructor, so he initiated Tai Chi for the group as well, and they would have a Tai Chi lesson every week, and then they'd have a group meeting as well. And as I said before, the Bendigo group had walking exercises. So this is just a bit of feedback from the participants and the leaders. Everyone comes to the meeting with their education manual, and most of the information we need is in that book. So we understand that the information is out there, and the group will help us figure out how to use the information and get better, manage better. From the participants, about the group meetings, better control of diabetes with support and encouragement, gain knowledge on being healthy, learning, and it is a continuum, learning to change my lifestyle, motivated to attend exercise sections, learn new ideas from peers on better management, learned useful things, access the healthy eating booklet, goal setting to improve my diabetes management. So these are all things that happened in the group that were appreciated by the participants. So if we look at the second key function, which was about providing social and emotional support, there was group discussion about coping, depression, anxiety. Some groups had psychologists come to the group and talk about how to manage stress in your life. We had relaxation exercises. One of the groups actually started with the relaxation CD every week, every meeting. They would just have this 5-minute of, okay, you're here now, let's do a relaxation exercise. And it was an opportunity to talk about social and family interactions, things that were happening, people that you know, don't have an impact in your life, and so you could easily talk about things. There was support outside the meeting between the leader and the participants, but also many friendships between participants occurred during the intervention. And then again, implementing these exercises and groups together. We lost one of our participant members and this was the leader, comments from the leader. I phoned the group members to tell them about Jay. 3 of us went to the funeral and a card was signed by everyone in the group. Everyone was shocked when they heard, but we talked about her positive contributions to the group and her own positive action towards her diabetes management. So they used the group to grieve and to experience how to manage the fear. This could have been me as well. This is some of our Bendigo members and talking about the walk around the lake. It's a distance of about 1.5 kilometres, but with arthritic hips and bad backs, it was an achievement for some and easy for others, but we were there to do it, and the challenge is to do it again. Just very quickly, our linkage into the GP services and clinical care, a fairly high proportion of our group had their own physicians. Many of them had a management plan, and about half of them had private health insurance. Healthcare professionals attended the meeting, so we had dietitians and diabetes educators came to the meetings, so they were fairly well received. A couple of GPs, a couple of podiatrists, an exercise physiologist came to several of the groups, a pharmacist. Two of the group leaders, when we were talking about support on the telephone, we talked about accessing the pharmacist, and 2 of them went off and spoke to their regular pharmacist, and their pharmacist came and talked about drugs and the NDSS and the consumables that they were eligible to get. And then 4 of the groups went on the supermarket tours that are arranged by Diabetes Australia. Quite a few members have struggled with their own GPs in terms of giving support and encouragement and direction. I guess that they needed, and in fact, a couple of them have finally bitten the bullet in their last few meetings and decided to go to another practitioner, and have actually found that to be a positive move. For some people, that's been really difficult, as they've been with the GP for most of their life and have having to make that move is quite a difficult thing to do. But with support from the group members, they're realising it's actually been beneficial. So that is an issue. I think all of us face, we have a GP, and it's a bit like changing banks, isn't it? You don't want to do it. They're out there, they're available. You can go find a new GP, but are they going to be better or worse than the one that I've already got? So actually moving GPs is a little bit like moving your bank accounts. It's pretty hard. And luckily for these people, and this happened in several groups, they used the group, the leaders knew that the people were struggling with their GPs, and the group supported those members to actually bite the bullet and move, and in fact was a very positive experience. So 6 of the groups wish to continue meeting, and 5 of them, I think it shows, are from regional locations. Sustainability is an issue about these kinds of groups, and you do need to have people put in place opportunities for succession plans, so the leader's not the only one who's driving the group, but the group is being driven by the members. Some have established good support with their local health, community health services, and Diabetes Australia has undertaken opportunities to support the groups, but they are being a little bit reserved in how much of the program they're going to take on, given the results that we've achieved so far. And we've just been given a new grant in this year's round of NH and MRC grants to work in partnership with Diabetes Australia to develop some telehealth support. So that will be automated diabetes support and care over the phone. However, when we asked the participants about the key peer support functions, a fairly high proportion in general said that they were satisfied and they felt that the program addressed each of the peer support functions quite well, especially assistance in daily management. So they found that that was really a helpful aspect. Social and emotional support and assistance with keeping in contact and linked up with their GPs. So just in conclusion, no real great joy on a scientific, clinical, statistical basis, but no tears yet. We're still under the analysis umbrella, and there are some suggestions that peer support definitely improve things like medication adherence, and had the intervention gone on longer, then adhering to your medication may then well have ended up in improving the clinical outcomes. Key program outcomes that we felt that the key peer support functions were well achieved and evaluated by the participants. One of the things obviously that we were not planning on doing or evaluating or looking at ended up being this idea about supporting the supporters through the teleconference. That really worked well. And having DAVIC on board was a major plus. So these are all the people, obviously the peer leaders who put in a lot of time and dedication, the participants, and this is the cast of thousands. Our funding was from Peers for Progress, so if you haven't been to their website, it's available through the CIA. I love saying that. So a link to their Peers for Progress website, and they have a great newsletter and a blog and a Twitter page and everything as well. So, and if we've got time, I spoke with John briefly, and he suggested a couple of suggestions that we might want to discuss if we have time. But it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Michaela. We are just over time, and there are a couple more short presentations that John needs to give. I wonder, are there any other burning questions that people didn't have an opportunity to ask during Michaela's presentation?
Yeah, to Michaela, just one quick thing, because you expressed that disappointment of not seeing much change in matters to heart issues. What assumption made you think you could achieve that in a year?
Well, there is some other evidence out there predicated on the fact that they've used people who have HbA1cs much higher, very much. In America, they seem to be less well controlled, and that's a very common observation by Australian diabetologists, is that our population is much better controlled than, for example, the American population. Possibly because we have Medicare and a decent medical system that allows people to, and the NDSS, which gives people the opportunities to have cheaper consumables. So, and our drugs don't cost as much as the drugs on the American system as well.
Michaela, I'm not sure whether whether as you research a little bit further or review your stats, some of those baseline, the discrepancies between your intervention and your control group in terms of the characteristics of those groups might be taken into account or traced a little bit further.
We have taken, in the analysis, we've taken into account any differences.
It sort of goes to one of those, a couple of the points up there. that there's a 5 to 6% difference in 5 factors that I thought were significant. One was language, speaking English, that the intervention group was some 5% more likely to be non-English speaking.
Okay.
The 5 to 6% were not Caucasian.
Yep.
Some 6% were living as single with no dependents.
Right.
That 6-7% were were not employed.
Right. Yes.
Relative to, and that the current smokers were 5% higher. I would have thought that the combination of those sort of factors could well have contributed to the lack of the satisfactory results that you might have got, particularly from your health indicators, but also that's the range of social and psychological factors that accumulate.
Yeah.
That could definitely skew your
No, that's really great observation.
They just seem to add up to the 5 factors.
Yep. No, I think that's really important. So that kind of comes to this conversation that John and I have been having about rigour, and one of the ways that you can do that is to into the outcomes and figure out how much of each of those things contributes to your final outcome. But definitely, I will definitely go back and look at that again, John. Thanks.
Just briefly, my comment in relation to those issues that are up there is that we have an ongoing challenge to build the evidence for peer support working. We can't continue to expect a large commitment from our organisations and from funds, etc., if we're not beginning to show the benefits of these programs in research terms, not just in anecdotal terms. That's our challenge, and we have to keep working at it. I think the work that you're doing, Michaela, is really important in that regard.
Thanks, but I'd like to also just maybe caution people about how they look at their programs, and I think we've been very lucky in that we've got a lot of individual information, but we've also got a lot of program information, so that although we didn't perhaps achieve the 0.05 significance in a lot of our individual participants, I think we have shown that the program is achieving those key peer supports, that MS and diabetes, 2 totally different diseases, different needs for support, but the key support functions are still exactly the same. They need social support, they need help to live their daily lives, they need help to connect with their clinicians, and they need that support to be ongoing and available when they need it. 4 things, very similar needs, similar outcomes. So Peers for Progress are in fact very much adhering to these 4 key functions for your programs. So don't forget that that they're important, as well as from a research point of view, it's all about the individuals and can you show that it's 0.05 significance and everything. But, you know, I devoted 4 years of my life to this project, and I'm not unhappy that I don't have 0.05s everywhere. I think the program worked, and I've talked to the people who participated in the program. The results that I've got are encouraging as far as I'm concerned.
I think what's tricky too is that you're measuring sort of depression outcomes and things like that, and you don't have a group of people who are depressed to start with. So it's sort of, and I've noticed that a lot in the peer support literature, sort of we're measuring depression and things like that, but these people aren't depressed. They're coming with low levels of distress. They're there for those 4 things you talked about, and they're really the things that we need to be measuring, that we're doing a good job at.
Yeah.
And along those lines, I was thinking about the determinants of mental health, so the social sense of connectedness, that social inclusion. sense of belonging, and I couldn't rattle off the others, I was trying to Google it. But I'm thinking more at that determinants of well-being rather than at that clinical depression end of things that you're talking about. And the other thing that occurred to me was the research that's being done about health literacy. Someone that might actually, his name escapes me at the moment, is a sort of health literacy guru person.
Health literacy, I'm so interested in that.
Really,
I think it's a really huge aspect.
Yeah, really big link there. So I'm wondering if there's actually impacts or things that weren't measured that actually could have been beneficial. But,
the diabetes educators, I have to say, they have a model of that it's called a body man or something.
Oh yes.
And you know, it's got the blood vessels and the liver and everything, and people are actually really fascinated, and the level of lack of understanding in lay people who are just, you know, run-of-the-mill people who've never had to even study how the body works. It's amazing the interest, and you can see the lights kind of go on when they get this very simple education about how their body works, and I think that's really keys into health literacy.
It might be preventing other illnesses too. It's Helen Callagher.
Oh yes.
She's at the National thing.
Yes, and she's just retired actually.
Oh, is she?
Yes.
Yeah, but just the impacts that she was coming up with.
Yeah. She's a huge social health determinant lady. Yeah.
It would have been good too if you'd been able to do a group who didn't, as another control group, who didn't actually have the health information at the start.
Yes.
Because that, even that.
But ethically, that's the other thing you had to figure out in research as well, about ethically. You know, people sign up to a program, they want something from it.
But then they could get the results and the outcomes and
yes.
the learnings and
yeah, so no, but I agree. I wonder whether or not in our concern about giving people as much as we could, whether or not we kind of did ourselves a little bit of a disservice by educating everybody. I think it goes to the fact that diabetes education is really important. And the support is the cherry on top kind of thing that helps be maintained.
Please join me in thanking Michaela.